Good morning. So I'd like to begin this second how-to session on sustainability standards and how to meet them. So I think just before I kind of begin with my presentation, we've heard a lot today and actually yesterday as well. It's been kind of a theme, I think, going through the WEDF conference this year in terms of voluntary standards, voluntary sustainability standards, private standards, and their challenges, their costs, their importance in terms of market access, in terms of trade. And so I'd like to present to you this morning the work that we're doing at ITC related to concrete tools or solutions in the area of voluntary standards that are particularly relevant, these tools, to SMEs, but also you'll see to others, to also retailer, buying companies, as well as policymakers. But particularly from our perspective, the tools that we've developed are able to, I would say, help SMEs to get more out of the standards compliance type situation or role. So on the screen here, you'll see the ITC focus areas of activities. And standards, in many cases, are central to all of these in terms of promoting inclusive and sustainable or green trade, in terms of supporting regional integration, connecting to more high-value international markets, creating a conducive business environment. Standards play a role in all these areas of ITC's interventions. And then we also have to overlay the Sustainable Development Goals, which were launched a year ago in 2015 at the UN General Assembly. And particularly, we think that there are 3 SDGs that are relevant to the work that we're doing in the area of sustainability standards, specifically SDG 2 in terms of zero hunger, SDG 8 related to decent work and economic growth, and SDG 12 responsible consumption and production. So in terms of our impact and our work in terms of outputs, we're really trying to link our activities and our tools and our solutions in the voluntary standards area to these 3 SDGs. And then the program that I manage at ITC is called Trade for Sustainable Development, or the acronym is T4SD. We've also developed principles that guide our work, which are related to the SDGs. But specifically, these principles relate to challenges that were discussed this morning in this morning's panel session, but also were discussed yesterday, related to issues of sustainability, okay? Dealing with the challenges of showing or demonstrating to your buyer and your consumer that you're trading or processing or producing a product, whether it's tea, whether it's coffee, whether it's cocoa, whether it's fish, whatever the product may be, that you're producing in a sustainable way. And these days, the way that you demonstrate that is usually through a standard, right? So there is a lack of capacity in many cases at the SME level to deal with the technical requirements of standards. How do you monitor and track your performance against standards? How do you deal with understanding where are my sustainability gaps, or where are my performance or technical gaps in terms of my production? How do I understand what they are? So we're trying to provide tools at ITC that helps SMEs and exporters to understand these gaps. Transparency, that was brought up also, I believe, in one way or another at the earlier session this morning and yesterday. There are a number of these standards, hundreds actually. And the gentleman from the Dima Tea company mentioned, well, a lot of times we don't know where these standards are. We have to find information on the standards. So transparency is key. How do you get access to the standards data? Sometimes it's free, other times it's at a cost. The standards change. And then we talk about the overall level of harmonization, which was brought up by my colleague Rob in a question or intervention at the last panel. If we have 200, 300, 400 voluntary standards, you have to ask yourself the question, do we need these? And if so, well, how similar or dissimilar are they? It's a very good question, and we like to provide data and tools that allow users to put standards side by side to say, okay, these two standards, in fact, are quite different, or no, maybe these standards are actually 80 or 90 or 95% the same. So it is, if you will, one of our objectives or missions to enable either de facto or operational harmonization, mutual recognition of these different standards initiatives. And we think that this type of work applies really to the entire value chain. Obviously, first and foremost to ITC is the work that we do with the SMEs, the exporters. They bear the biggest, I would say, brunt in terms of cost, in terms of technical issues, in terms of information accessibility of information. So SMEs are key, but as you see from the screen, there are a lot of other entities or parts in the value chain that this stuff applies to. So it applies to cooperatives, producer organizations. It applies to the middlemen, the processors, the traders. It applies to the brands, the retailers, so Nestle, Unilever, Coca-Cola. Obviously, consumers are demanding more and more information, so it applies to the consumer as well. So we avoid greenwashing and we try to inform and educate consumers in the right way. And then the policymaker has a key role to understand, okay, how do I incentivize or develop certain policy environments that are conducive to my producer population becoming more compliant to these standards? How do I know where in my own domestic market or sector areas in the economy, whether it's tea or cocoa or whatever or coffee, whatever the sector is, how do I know where my producers are performing? Where are the gaps? Where do I need to invest resources, for example? And then also the standards organizations themselves, because we have to remember every standard, there's an organization behind that standard, whether it's an NGO like Fair Trade, whether it's an international organization like ISO, whether it's a company like Coca-Cola or Unilever, whether it's a public voluntary organization or a public voluntary initiative like EU or USDA Organic, there is an organization behind the standard that manages it, that establishes the overall criteria. And so we also, I think, have a role to play in helping these organizations understand how their users are doing and where are the gaps in their user base, or where are their certified producers, and are they meeting the letter of the standard. So to do that at ITC, we have developed several different tools, platforms, some of which exist today and some of which we're going to be launching in early 2017. And so what I want to do today, the balance of my time here this morning, and then I'll open it up to Q&A, is I want to kind of walk you through these tools that we've developed and to kind of give you the background of them and really the future in terms of where we are going and how you can get involved and work with us in the process. So earlier this morning in the first session, several of my colleagues mentioned the Standards Map website, which is an existing ITC tool. In fact, this tool has been around since 2011, and I want to spend some time on it today just to give you an overview so you can use it if you're interested. The Standards Map tool started, really, that was the genesis maybe of the T4SD program, I guess I could say, back in 2009, and we really were responding to the needs of our main clients, SME exporters, about this whole maze of standards, the proliferation of standards, the cost associated with standards, all these questions, but really no answers, and where do you go for the answers? And so we said, okay, let's leverage our experience and capacity in developing global public goods, such as market access map and trade map, and focus some resources on this problem statement. So we developed a global database that really looks at the voluntary standard side, not the mandatory side, such as SPS and TBT, that's handled in the WTO, but everything besides that. So all the voluntary standards which are outside of the WTO process. So by that I mean an organic standard like USDA or EU. I mean a NGO standard like Fair Trade or Rainforest Alliance. I'm referring to a code of conduct, like the McDonald's Code of Conduct was referred to earlier today. Those types of standards. So private or NGO type. So we want to provide information on what these standards are, what are the rules that are dealing with those standards, and what are the characteristics of them. And so to do that, we're looking at a variety of criteria. So when we say voluntary standards, we're really talking about the sustainability discussion here. We're talking about the sustainability agenda, the SDGs that was referred to by my colleague from the UN Global Compact earlier. We're talking about environmental criteria like biodiversity, like deforestation, like issues of water management. We're talking about social issues like child labor, like the right to organize, like working hours. We're talking about ethics requirements, we're talking about quality, so food quality and safety type requirements, and management, how you manage your farm or your operation. What type of procedures do you put in place for storage, holding of product, packaging, cold storage, for example, things like that. So quality management types of processes. So one example of a private standard that does a lot in terms of quality management would be Global Gap. So to kind of organize all this, because it is a mess, it's a lot of stuff to look at, we developed the T4SD Global Database back in 2009. Now I know databases are not exciting, but we kind of get excited about it a bit in T4SD, but we think that it's really, I would say, today probably the reference, if you will, globally on these voluntary standards. We have over 1,400 data points in the database that looks at both sides of the standard system. So look at it as two sides of one coin. So you have the criteria, what you need to do, so environment, social, quality, ethics, and then the processes, how you do it, or how the standard implements in the field. So for example, is it a business-to-business standard, like Global Gap? Or is it a business-to-consumer standard, like Fair Trade or Rainforest Alliance, where you see the little green frog on your package of coffee? Is it a standard for verification, for certification? Is it just an overall framework or guideline? What are the, let's say, monitoring and evaluation type processes the standard undergoes? What type of accreditation process does the standard maintain or not for its conformity assessment? All these kinds of questions, which are very important because you could have a standard that on paper is wonderful. It looks like it's going to solve everyone's problems, but when you look at the fine print in terms of how it's implemented, it may be quite weak. And then you have the issue of greenwashing and things like that. So the database is fundamental. And then once that data is inputted, and we have a whole quality management procedure that I won't spend time on today that actually ensures that the data going in is quality controlled and valid and updated annually. Then the output is the Standards Map web tool, standardsmap.org. This is a free tool. It's completely free to everyone in this room, everyone in the world, in fact. So we don't charge anything. And you can now compare and contrast over 225 standards. What you can also do is you can run, if you're a producer or a standard user, depending on your place in the value chain, what you can do is you can conduct a self-assessment or a diagnostic. So this is not to replace an audit. We're not an auditing company, but what it's aimed at is providing at least a producer an understanding of, okay, I have to comply to this standard. I really don't know where to begin. I don't really want to invest a lot of money in this process without knowing more or less where I am. So doing a self-assessment is very, very helpful because it allows you to see, okay, here's my current farming practices today, and based on the standard that I want to become certified or compliant to, here's where I need to go. Here's my delta. Here's my gap. And this can be quite useful in really understanding where we need to go. I mean, human nature being what it is, we always like to, at least for me, I always like to know what I need to do to reach a certain goal. Where am I, we're always looking now more and more at our iPhones, quantifying how many steps we walk, how many flights of stairs we've climbed in a day, and how does that meet the benchmark? we're more and more obsessing on data, or at least I am. So this is very useful because it allows you to see where you are and where you need to go. Then it also provides a roadmap, basically prioritizing the criteria of the standard that you need to meet next. Because many standards have a different way of, or have a unique individual way of essentially telling you what criteria need to be complied with when. So you may have a child labor criteria which has to be done the day you receive your certification. However, the quality management plan can be required in year 3. And perhaps the biodiversity percentage of the farm is only a recommendation. So it makes no sense, if you will, from a business perspective to work on the biodiversity thing, which is a recommendation, when the child labor or the quality management plan is required. So it helps you to chart your path toward compliance. So that's standards map. That exists today. You can go online and check it out. What we're working on right now, to be launched in early 2017, is really the next phase. And I'm going to spend a lot of time on this later on in my presentation, but right now I want to give you a bit of a kind of a taste for it. And we're calling it the Sustainability Network. And this happens to deal with the issue of value chain and value chain visibility of the upstream producer. So today, as we know, value chains are global, they're interconnected. No matter what product we're talking about, whether it's cocoa, whether it's soy, whether it's cotton, whether it's textiles, they're international and they're linked. And a lot of times the SME producers that are located predominantly in the developing world for these commodities are really getting the short end of the stick. They're not really getting a lot of visibility, they're not getting a lot of credit. They're being, as our colleague as well from the DIMA Tea company mentioned, it's compliance only and cost only, but yet how do we improve the ability for producers to really get something from this? What's the business or the value proposition? So we're trying in our own way to provide that through the network, the Sustainability Network, which is, think of it in simple terms as a LinkedIn or Facebook for upstream producers, processors, operators, farmers in any commodity or textile sector or fishery sector in the world, where these producers can create a profile, can do a self-assessment against a standard, and then can post their profile on our tool, which is a global public good, accessible by everyone. That way, they can put themselves literally on the map and take credit for what they're doing and connect with all types of partners, whether it's a buyer, whether it's a trading company, a processor, whether it's a financier, whether it's a certification company, whether it's a standard. Just like you connect with people on LinkedIn and Facebook, the same logic applies to the Sustainability Network. And you can zero in quite specifically based on GPS coordinates where you are on the map. We're also working with GS1, which stands for Global Standard 1. I don't know if anyone of you know who GS1 is in the audience. GS1 is, to put it in very simple terms, it's the barcode company, right? So anytime you have a product you buy at the store, there's a barcode on that product and a 13-digit number associated with that barcode. That's a GS1 number. That's a GTIN. G stands for Global Trade Identification Number. That's a product-specific traceability number. We're working with GS1 not to give GTINs on the product, but rather GLNs, which stands for Global Location Number, which means that you would be able to have a unique ID related to your locus of production. And since this GLN number is internationally recognized by most companies that are trading, then if you're the producer of coffee in Colombia and you're selling to a processor, that GLN number can then be transferred down the chain ultimately to the end buyer or retailer, whether it's Carrefour or Walmart or whomever. So it allows traceability, it allows higher levels of confidence in your profile, because we can all fake our profile. If you want to create a fictitious profile, we can do that. So in order to guard against fraud, the GLN is very useful at, let's say, providing a high level of confidence that your profile is actually accurate or bona fide. And then on the sustainability network, what you'll have is you'll have a list of those companies that are on the network, that are in the system. You'll see where they are, what they produce, what their certifications are, what their self-assessments are. And if you choose to share your data with a potential partner, trading partner, just like I would share my profile on LinkedIn, or I would want to link or share my Facebook profile with any of you, the farmer or the producer, the operator on the network will have the choice to actually share that information, connect with buyers or traders, where then these trading partners, if they have the right, can get more information on the specific sustainability parameters or accomplishments of that upstream farm, such as their percentage against a certain standard. We could put in QR codes where if you scan it, you can then be taken to the product, the ultimate product that they produce. And then you can be driven to more, let's say, granular data of that company. And again, this is at the data that we are talking about is based on the needs or the, let's say, the specific privacy constraints or considerations of that company. So it's optional how much information a company will divulge. But if they want to divulge many types of information in terms of their turnover, the number of employees, who they sell to, the different standards, all this information, it's up to them. So they can share as little or as much as they want, just like you and I share as little or as much as we want on Facebook. Sometimes, from my experience, too much information is the case with Facebook, actually. So it's a balance for sure. But the key is that if you want to communicate, I'm certified to fair trade. Here's my GLNs for various plots, because the global location number for GS1 can be plot specific. You could be a farm that has two different crops, say rice and wheat. The rice could be certified to Global Gap. The wheat could be conventional. You can delineate those two based on the GS1 system. And then you can also upload all types of, let's say, other corroborating documents or data, so photos of your farm, titles to your land, PDFs of your certificates. Again, all here with the aim of bolstering the credibility of your profile. So that's the sustainability network. Now that is basically in development. We're almost ready to launch the first, let's say, version of that, which will be at the end of January next year, so just a few months away. So the idea is that we're really trying to bring these various types of platforms together. And so we look at it kind of as a crossroads, if you will. And so you see in the center of this PowerPoint slide, you see the word sustainability map. That's where we bring it all together in one platform. We bring the standards map tool together with the network, and we also add two other parts which will give us, if you will, the composite of the sustainability map. The next is we call the sustainability community, and this is leveraging an existing platform called the Sustainability Exchange. So that's, again, a free tool from ITC, sustainabilityexchange.org, and this is basically a resource of different types of materials, so training materials, how-to guides, quality management guides, a link to experts in various sectors in various countries, a link to organizations that are engaged in farm and producer and agricultural quality management, communities of practice where we have online blogs or discussions, as well as news, jobs, and events feeds. So this is an existing tool, sustainabilityexchange.org, and that will be integrated with Standards Map and the network into the Sustainability Map platform, which we launch at the beginning of 2017. So when you're on the community side of Sustainability Map in January, you're then able to understand or see or access information relevant to you. So if I'm a cocoa producer in Ivory Coast, then I'll be able to get information on relevant quality management guides, information on experts in the field that are working in my sector, that are dealing with issues that are near and dear to me, whether it's water management, pesticide use, labor conditions, whatever the case may be. And then you're able to connect with them. And the way you connect with these experts and these institutions is via the network. And you're also able to leverage everything else that we've been doing at ITC. So as my colleague Marion mentioned during the earlier session, we also have other tools like Market Access Map, Trade Map, Procurement Map, and a host of other trade intelligence and market data type offerings at ITC. These are all available, or will be, I should say, all available on Sustainability Map. So you're able to also access these different tools as well. And these tools, like Standards Map, are global public goods and free of charge in Sri Lanka. Last but not least, as part of the Sustainability Map, we're also going to be offering users quantitative market data. So one of the perennial questions that have come to us when we do trainings in the field with producers is, okay, this is all well and good, all these standards, and we need to be certified. Well, tell me about the market. Who's demanding this stuff? Why should I be doing all this, making all these investments, if there's no buyer for my product? Which is a really good question. So what we're doing is we're working on a project with two other organizations. One is the Swiss Organic Agriculture Institute. The other is an NGO based in Canada called IISD. And we've already done this, the first edition. We printed a document, a report, back in January of this year, which looks at 9 agricultural products, so bananas, coffee, cocoa, you can see them on the screen, palm oil, soy, etc., and 14 sustainability standards that certify or verify these products, and we've got market data in terms of, what is the uptake, what is the growth or the contraction in whatever case of these different certified commodities. And you can see all this market data. Again, this is from the supply side. You can see the market data based on these commodities and your interest in terms of the standards. And so this is very helpful in seeing trends. So this is an annual type of exercise that we're engaged in. So we have the 2016 report, which captures data from 2015, 2014, 2013, all the way in certain cases to 2009. And then we're going to be going forward. So we'll be able to build nice time series where you'll be able to see, if you will, the evolution of the demand for these different sustainable or certified commodities. And we'll be also adding, as we go, probably a product and a standard every year. And this data will be available at your fingertips on the system. So if you're a producer of rice or a producer of soy and or tea, and you're interested in understanding, okay, what are the trends from the certified or, let's say, sustainable side of things, you can be able to get this information. So that's, in a nutshell, the sustainability map concept. So it's taking the standards map tool that exists, it's going to be putting together with it the sustainability network, which we launched in January. It's going to be then incorporating the sustainability exchange platform we already have, it already exists, and last but not least, it's going to bring in the market data side of it as well into one kind of one-stop shop or a clearinghouse for this information. So what I'll do, probably a break from my talking, what I'll do right now is I'm going to play a 3 or 4 minute video that will show more or less what this will look like on your laptop or on your Android or on your phone. So if I could have the video.
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
Great, thank you. So before I kind of finish my remarks, I wanted to also look into, or kind of also explain kind of how we're working with various supply chain partners or various supply chain tiers. So how do we kind of operationalize the tools and the platforms that I just have been mentioning and speaking about? And so what I want to go into, because there's a lot of questions in terms of, I'm sure you have questions and we'll have room for Q&A in about 5-10 minutes. But I'm sure there's a lot of questions in terms of, okay, what's the value add for producers? Why should I as a SME do this? Why would a company want to engage? And questions as to, okay, how about connectivity? How about issues in terms of literacy? How about issues in terms of access to computers, things like that? So there are a lot of questions, and I want to also address those. And I'll do that in the next few slides. So in order to kind of make this logical in terms of how we intervene or how we work in the supply chain, we've actually broke it up into tiers. Now this is a stylized view of a value chain or a supply chain, because obviously every supply chain or value chain is different. Some have many different entities and companies involved, but we've broken it up into 3 different tiers to make it, I would say, just simpler from a conceptual perspective. The first tier is really when you look at the retailer, the brand, but also we can look at it from the policymaker, the government view, and indeed the standards owner or the standards organization view. And we think that there's a business or a value proposition there because all these different actors want information on the sustainability profiles of their upstream producers or suppliers. They need it. Their consumers are demanding it, and this kind of intelligence is useful for making policy decisions as well. Tier 2 is the middleman in the value chain or supply chain world. It's the processor, the trader. They're being increasingly called upon to require their upstream suppliers, their upstream farmers, to get that information. And so they're kind of squeezed. They're in the middle. So their buyer, whether it's Walmart or Unilever or whomever, they're asking the intermediary to get that upstream farmer's sustainability information. So the risk is in some ways put on them. So how can we make this easier for them? How can we help them and provide them with a cost-free tool that allows them to, let's say, better engage with their buyers and also their suppliers? And this also can apply to trade promotion organizations, other types of, let's say, producer organizations or smallholders associations, different actors in the value chain as well. It could help certification bodies. They also need to take stock of this and track this information. And then last but not least, in tier 3 is the farmer, the producer, but also the consumer, okay, in the sense that they want this information, but also they need to understand in this whole landscape, this whole myriad of issues, how do I understand what is greenwashing as opposed to what is, let's say, a rigorous or a robust standard. So these slides kind of go into just kind of specific examples from the private sector perspective. Again, tier 1 is we're looking at the international buyer, the retailer. Tier 2, manufacturers, processors. Tier 3, the farmer. The public sector view would be tier 1 is the government ministries, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Trade. Tier 2 would be a trade promotion organization or a producer organization, and then tier 3 would be consumers like you and me. And then for standards, tier 1 would be the standard organization, so Fair Trade, Rainforest Alliance. Tier 2, the certification bodies that certify or verify, do the conformity assessment, and then tier 3 would again be the upstream producers. So now I want to show you how, from a tier perspective, we engage. Because this is also very important, especially at tier 3, which is the most, let's say, difficult in terms of engagement. So we know that there's a lot of issues with Wi-Fi connectivity, with remote access to farmers that are far from cities or towns. So we have developed for these supply chain, value chain solutions, and indeed for the sustainability map, which we presented earlier, we invented really 3, I would say, engagement mechanisms. The first engagement mechanism is the classic one that you and I probably would do in this room, is we go onto the website, sustainabilitymap.org, we create our profile, we enter the data that we want, do a self-assessment against the standard, and then be able to link with other farmers or producers or companies on the network. That's the classic route. There's also a route that we can envision via an invitation, whereas me as a producer or a farmer, I am invited by my buyer or my ultimate buyer, either my intermediary buyer or the ultimate buyer. So if I'm a producer of oranges and I sell to a processor, that processor invites me. So that's how I'm brought onto the system. And then there's also offline engagement. And offline engagement can be done a number of ways. It can be done through a training in the field. It can be done through an extension service. It can be done through a certification company, various types of mechanisms. And then from there, you're able to go onto your dashboard on the sustainability map, enter your data, and you've seen these screenshots before. And then do the requisite in terms of making your profile and sharing. We think that this tier 3 has a lot of potential, and we think that is because we're working in many cases with companies already. So we're working right now with the SAI platform, which stands for the Sustainable Agricultural Initiative Platform. This is a membership of about 86 companies, including Unilever, including Nestle, including Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Danone, Bacardi, and others, Ahold, which is a retailer chain in Europe. And we have developed for the SAI platform this tool, which allows, through an invitation mechanism, to get upstream farmer sustainability data. So if I am, for example, Ahold, and I know my intermediary, let's say, supplier, my trader, I invite him, and then he invites the upstream farmer of, let's say, mangoes in Kenya. And then all three, the mango producer, the intermediary, and Ahold, are all connected in the system. This is something which is working today. So it's an invitation mechanism, basically, like we do on LinkedIn. And this allows for the transmittal of this sustainability information up to the buyer, or the retailer in this case, but it also allows the supplier to take credit for what he's doing, but also to show more or less where he is. So the idea here is, let's say that we're working with several thousand producers of one commodity, like mangoes, then this mango producer is able to benchmark himself against his peers. So there's value in it for this upstream producer. He's able to say, okay, I'm a mango producer against this code of conduct, and here's how I'm performing, and then I could look and see my, say, population of 4,000 other mango producers in the system, perhaps in the same country, but maybe other countries. I can see how I'm producing vis-a-vis my population. So that type of intelligence is quite useful. So various mechanisms. And then in terms of the direct engagement or the offline engagement, we are working with, for example, Swiss Contact, a Swiss NGO in Colombia in the cocoa sector, where we have this system online in Spanish, and we're working with Swiss Contact in the field to take this self-assessment offline through tablets and then bring up, if you will, this information to the cooperative level and then on to the buyer level. In this case, we now have over 1,000 profiles of Colombian cocoa producers in the system. The tier 2 mechanism for registration or coming online is simpler, because tier 2 processors more or less have probably a better accessibility to the internet than the upstream level. They would be either through the direct internet connectivity or through an invitation from their brand or retailer buyer. The benefit we see for the middleman or the processor and the trader is that they're able to understand better their whole network that is under them, and to track better, if you will, when they've last engaged with those upstream buyers, or sorry, those upstream suppliers, and how those suppliers are doing. And we can offer this at a cost-free level for the intermediaries. It's just a better way of keeping track of their information. From a certification company perspective, again, I mean, if they have to report information to their standard or to their company, keeping track of it is also quite useful. As well as, for example, if you are, for example, certifying a certain product, let's say cocoa, and that is being bought by 2 or 3 or 4 retailers. If those retailers are demanding the exact same sustainability criteria or standard, the data can be anonymized from the upstream level, thereby allowing the certification company to transmit this information to several buyers pre-competitively. So you avoid the issue of multiple audits, and you avoid the issue of kind of auditing the same company 5 times for 99% of the same criteria. So we get into the issue here again of harmonization or de facto mutual recognition. And then last but not least, we think there's a value proposition for the tier 1. So we're looking at the tier 1, meaning the brand or the retailer. We're also looking at tier 1, for example, as a government ministry or a standard organization to better know what the population is how the population is performing. So if I'm fair trade, how are all my fair trade farms doing? Where are they, and when's the last time they've been certified? Are they improving? What's the situation? Right now, I would probably say, I haven't done this quantitatively or have done any kind of survey, but I'd probably say 90% of standard organizations have no idea how the upstream farmers are performing and what's the attrition rate and what's the recertification rate or the dropping of certificates. All that kind of upstream data beyond maybe a handful of standards, it doesn't exist. So we think this could be a potential useful tool for standard organizations. Obviously, the companies, they need to show their consumers where their farmers are producing and at what level. We can offer this type of solution secure, and we can offer it on UN servers. So we're not commoditizing, we're not selling this data. It's, when we're on LinkedIn or Facebook, we probably have no idea where our data is going. Here, it's going nowhere unless the farmer authorizes the transmittal of that data. So again, this information will only be shared if the owner of that data gives the authorization. But if you're a government or a company, and you want to know, okay, I've got a population of producers in a certain sector, in a certain region of my country, how are they performing? How are they performing against peers in a different country that competes with my country for the same product? So if I'm an exporter of product A, and I'm competing with a country that's also exporting product A, how are my producers doing vis-a-vis them in terms of sustainability? Am I moving up, if you will, the value chain in terms of sustainable attributes? Or I can make interventions from a policy side or a technical side in terms of where I want to invest my development dollar. Do I need to focus on environmental issues? Do I need to focus on social issues? Where are the sustainability hotspots in my country, in my product sectors that are key to my export markets? These types of, let's say, these types of data intelligence on the producers in the country can be rendered quite easily with this type of tool. So that's it in a nutshell. I know it's a lot of kind of information to digest. This is Sustainability Map. We're launching this at the end of January. And before we break for lunch, I guess what I'll do now is open it up to any questions from the floor on anything that I've covered. So thank you for your attention. All clear? Any questions? Please.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the nice presentation. I'm Amunur Rahman from Bangladesh, CEO, Expo Pro Center for Business Development and Communication. As I understand from your session that, of course, by adopting these sustainability standards, there will be a cost. And for SME, especially in the private sector, will be paid for this cost, which actually increase the price of their final product? If not, how they will overcome the challenge? Thank you.
Yeah, so obviously, these standards are a cost, and I think in many cases that's something that's not going to be able, in many cases, to get beyond. So our, if you will, kind of guiding operation, our philosophy is really to provide as much in terms of the solutions that we can in a global public good manner, but also to work with companies in order to try to, through a public-private partnership, I guess is the best way to put it, to provide these types of tools. And I think we always, I know that the biggest burden of cost is obviously felt at the production, at the SME level, that's for sure. But I think also from the point of the buyer, they're also being faced with a lot of costs as well in terms of they're certifying thousands of farms per year. They've got to deal with a myriad of standards. They have also a lot of costs in terms of economic and also just risk issues that they have to deal with. So we see value on both sides of the value chain, and where we can work with companies and provide these types of solutions which are paid for by the company. So we work with companies, they do, if you will, fund us on a cost recovery basis to build these tools, but that allows us to drive the solution free, if you will, to the upstream segments of the value chain, so the intermediate, so tier 2 and tier 3 basically. And then we're also working with ways to incentivize delivery mechanisms where the companies are also engaged with helping to, let's say, offset some of the costs that are accruing to upstream producers. So we're working with one company that they, again, are engaged in this. They know their suppliers directly, and they essentially cover the cost of the certification company to go to the farm to do this, to enter the data through essentially that direct kind of offline engagement. So they are working with the company. So they're in a sense bearing that cost of the certification, not the actual farmer. And the farmer then gets to, if you will, have information on their own diagnostic, not maybe through an internet platform, but through a printed diagnostic report that shows their analytics and their improvement over time. So it's trying to also provide some intelligence and value add to the producer and saying, okay, it's not just about certifying the same condition every year, we're actually trying to move up in terms of performance, kind of a continuous improvement perspective. And I think that's also what the gentleman from Nestle alluded to in the prior session, is that, you know, certification is not an end in itself, it has limitations, and so we're looking to kind of move beyond that certification loop and little by little provide more of a value add to the SME. Any other question?
My name is Aslam Pakali. I'm president of Pakistan Sri Lanka Business Forum and former vice chairman of All Pakistan Fruits and Agriculture Association. My question is that all these things regarding the gap certification. Now, due to our constitution does not allow us that the government should give some subsidies on this gap certification. So, because there are certain limitations of our government. So now what has happened that with the platform of our association, we have given a proposal to our government because it has come into the provincial subject now. Before it was a federal subject. So instead of giving a global gap title, we can give park gap title, which are very similar to the global gap. And there is other question also. Now the issue is the gap certification should be in the cluster form, not the individual form. If one form is certified and the neighboring form is not certified, then the impact is not there. So how to deal with that? Can you elaborate on that? Thank you very much.
Thanks. It's a very good question. So, yes, there are many, let's say, instances of a local gap type situation, like you alluded to. So there is example in China. There's China gap. There's Kenya gap in Kenya, which are, if you will, national type versions, I guess is the best way to put it, of the global gap standard. And those are, if you will, used as either taking steps approaches toward meeting maybe the higher level of stringency that global gap requires, or indeed essentially using it as a proxy for a global gap in certain markets. So that is something which is a good process forward in order to improve capacity, and global gap can actively work with you, to help make sure that you craft your national gap code or standard in a way that is consistent, I would say, with the global gap standard. In terms of the issue of certification of one farm where the neighboring farm is not, I mean, again, that all has to relate to the specific nature of the standard. Some standards do allow for group certifications and others do not. And so again, there you have to, consult. Standards map would be a perfect resource to understand, okay, how does global gap approach that? I know certain other standards allow it, others don't. And how does that really work in terms of where you want to go? And if you want to go that route, how would that, I would say, impact your acceptance of the certificate on certain markets? Last thing to say is that, we'd be happy to reference the Pakistan gap standard on standards map. I mean, we've referenced China gap on standards map already. We have Canada gap on standards map. So we have many local gap standards already in the database, and we would be happy to also reference that as well, so your users can then do a benchmark, if you will, between Pakistan gap and global gap or other similar codes that they would be interested in. Any other questions?
Maybe one.
Okay, one more question, then we got to, I think, wrap it up.
All right, I'll be quick. Vincent Subilia, Geneva Chamber of Commerce, Switzerland. First of all, I'd like to thank you and congratulate you for the these outstanding tools which prove very useful to entrepreneurs. Then one question with respect to standards. I think you used the word maze and proliferation. So is there any due diligence that you run up front in the selection of the standards and the labels which you then promote on your tool? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. So basically, right now we're at 225 systems or more, I think, that are in the database and on the tool. We have various, let's say, levels for working with an initiative. So first of all, they have to be an initiative that will allow us to reproduce their standard free of charge. So every standard you see on the system is there because they've allowed us to reproduce those standards without any kind of license fee or buying the code. Okay, so it's 100% of a pro bono relationship between us and the standard organization. There's no financial relationship. So that's the first, let's say, rule. Second is the standard we have to deal with. The standard has to deal with some level of or some pillar of sustainability. So we're talking environmental, social or labor, quality, safety, ethics, and traceability. So these are the kind of pillars that we're working with when it comes to the standards. We're not really dealing with technical type standards such as the technical requirements that allow me to plug this beamer into probably every computer in this room. We're outside of that type of standard right now. But that's just to say, if you look at the overall product and geographic spread of the systems on standards map, we now are over 100 product sectors in over 120 countries worldwide. So it's a pretty good geographic spread. Then we also have essentially the requirement that the standard has to have an implementation system. There has to be some way, or they have to basically say they're not for implementation, they're just a guideline. So there has to be some type of written implementation system for how the standard is verified at the farm or the company level. So, some type of conformity assessment type process, unless it's just a guideline, but then it's stated as such. So that's more or less our operating procedures. We have a governance committee that essentially works with us to ensure that the database is updated every year through a multi-stakeholder process. We, at our team in Geneva and our consultants worldwide, we enter the data into an online data entry tool. We have it quality controlled by consultants, additional consultants in the sector of specialization, whether it's aquaculture, forestry, meat, whatever the sector is. It's given back to the standard. There's a back and forth where we go over any questions and clarifications, and then it's uploaded to the web once we get the green light. So that's more or less our process. And then last but not least, in terms of where we're going, we're now more kind of a demand-driven approach. I mean, standards really come to us now and ask to put the system online. We think with 225, we're now kind of got a pipeline out to about 250, 260. We think we've more or less covered the, I would say, the number of standards that are relevant to most of the type of activities we're dealing with, but then there are also the new ones that come to us. So I've got